What's up, folks? David here, TexasHornsFans.com. So we're going to go game by game through the 2021 schedule, making the predictions. We're not going to do score predictions. We're just going to do win-losses and also just kind of look at some of the interesting things about the schedule, what to predict, and definitely leave your comments below. Let me know your predictions. Which games worry you the most? What do you expect? What stands out to you most about the schedule? And throughout my picks, I'm going to do what I think should happen, not necessarily what I think will happen. So feel free to drop your comments below with whichever ones you think. What do you think should happen? What do you think will happen game by game? But hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to give it a like, share it out. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, and if you haven't gone through our position by position breakdowns and previews for the season, those are all now available on the channel for all the position groups, so go check those out and leave your comments below as well there. And don't forget to check us out at TexasHornsFans.com. Enjoy the video. All right, here is the entire schedule. Good thing we have more games this year as opposed to the 10 that we ended up with last year. Remember, we didn't play the Kansas game. So one thing I like to do with the schedule is kind of take a little higher level look at how the games are kind of, spread out, where the bulk of the schedule is, and just look at any just sort of interesting things that stick out. One thing that stood out to me is that there's not a bye until after the Oklahoma State game. That's after the first half of the season is already done. So this thing has what 7 games in a row before a bye between Oklahoma State and Baylor. That's pretty significant. Now, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 of those first 7 games in Austin or Dallas. So you've only got, you go to Arkansas and then you go up to Fort Worth to play TCU. So not as much travel within those first 7. But that's a pretty decent stretch before the bye. Now, the bulk of the schedule to me, kind of the juggernaut of the schedule, really to me starts with TCU and goes through Iowa State. So that is October 2nd through November 6th. And again, with a bye week in there. In between. So that's TCU, that's the Land Thieves, that's Oklahoma State, and then up the street to Baylor, and then going to Iowa State. That's pretty tough. That's really 4 road games, counting going to Dallas. At least you're not staying in Austin. The only home game in that stretch is Oklahoma State. So, even though that's not very far traveling except for Iowa State, it's still getting out of Austin. It's still spending hours traveling and time. In addition to the fact that you're playing the best teams in the conference within that stretch, which is tough, no doubt. So that stood out to pretty interesting to me. So no matter how the month of September pans out, that October stretch through November 6th against Iowa State, that's the bulk of the schedule. That's where things are really going to get shook up. So, and then just kind of the bottom half there, playing the 2 Kansas teams and then having to go out to West Virginia this year. So let's get into week 1, though. Looking at the first 2 weeks, several years ago, I think you would probably look at these and think, a decent start to a schedule. Maybe you would have thought that Arkansas would have been a little better than they were last year. And then you would typically think that Louisiana Lafayette, would not be as good as they were last year. So these two games to me has sort of, kind of flip-flopped. But week 1 against the Raging Cajuns in Austin, remember, this is the team that beat Iowa State to open up the season last year. This team is no joke. I think they finished 15th in the nation last year, losing just one game. They beat Appalachian State. They won their bowl game. And the only loss they had was to Coastal Carolina, who was kind of also surprisingly pretty good last year. But this team's no joke. This team can play. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at their style of play or what they're kind of running out there, but number one, they're going to come into Austin with a lot of confidence, especially considering that they beat the Big 12's number 2 team last year to open up the season. We've also seen Texas drop week 1 games in the past 4 or 5 years. Remember Maryland. So this is going to be a really, really interesting game. It's also going to be interesting to see who ends up, being the quarterback. As of this recording, it's looking more and more like Hudson Card is going to be the number 1 guy, at least at the start of the season. So he's going to go into his first collegiate start as a redshirt freshman against a really good team, against a team that Brock Purdy couldn't beat last year. So that's going to be, it's absolutely gonna set a tone. So still, and as we go through these picks week by week, I'm picking by what I think should happen, not what I think will happen. I might come back and do a couple of picks on what I absolutely could see happen. But going through this schedule, I'm going to pick what I think should happen each week, given this team's strengths, weaknesses, and what I think we should see. This one, I'm going to go ahead with a win, 1-0. I'm going to say that it's a pretty decently high scoring, maybe into the 30s for each team. But I do think that if Texas does end up winning pretty significantly, and I would say that's around 17 points or more, I'm going to say it's going to be because of the defense, not because of the offense. If the defense can really keep them out of the end zone, that's where I think Texas starts to pull away in this game. Not that the offense is going to be able to just put up a bunch of points in the first half and then just kind of ride that cushion out through the second half. That's kind of how I see this thing playing out. I think the defense is going to be surprisingly good this year. I just kind of have a feeling that these older guys, Keandre Coburn, Deshaun Jameson, Anthony Cook, Josh Thompson, Overshone, the transfers, Ben Davis and Ray Thornton from Alabama and LSU, are really, really going to step up this year. So that's kind of how I see that one playing out. I'm not doing any point predictions. And then we go to play the Piggies, Arkansas. This game suddenly has way, way bigger implications than it did even just a month ago. With the news of moving to the SEC now, I think this game is going to get a lot more attention than it would have. There is, obviously more coming out that Texas and Oklahoma are expected to go ahead and make the jump to the SEC next year. Whether that ends up being they have to buy out the contract, which is their contracts, which is equal to around $80 million apiece. But with these schools, that's absolutely going to happen. There's a couple of other contingencies there to where maybe they don't have to do that, depending on the ESPN contracts and all that type of stuff. I'm not getting too much into that. But the point is, if Texas can't beat an Arkansas team, you're going to have everyone all over the country saying that they can't beat anyone else in the SEC. So this is a big, big game. Arkansas was not good last year. So yeah, this game is it's one of the most interesting matchups, I think, on this schedule. Now that the SEC news has become official. So if they can come out with a week 1 victory over Louisiana, a good team, they should be riding pretty high into Arkansas. So I'm going to have this with a win, and really a must win. You know, you can't make this jump to the SEC and get a little precursor game here against Arkansas, one of the worst teams in the SEC last year, and not win. You know, you've got to win this game. It's not like, you know, the LSU game, you know, from a couple years ago and that we didn't play last year, getting rid of the those non-conference games, or that being a non-conference game. So that's a big game. Got to win. Go back into Austin and play the Owls, our little buddies from Houston. Played them a couple years ago, and you know, obviously took care of business pretty fast. This is a really good third preseason game, because number one, you've got a really good team in week 1 that you're going to have to get past. Then you're traveling to Arkansas for sort of an SEC preview game that there's a lot of pressure to beat Arkansas. You got to beat that team. Now you come back into Austin and play Rice, who's not a good team. They've been running the same offense, I think, since the 1900. But this I definitely have a win. This is the game too that you hope that you can see a lot of your second stringers, a lot of your young receivers get in there and get some time. You know, if Hudson Card does end up being the starter, you know, hopefully you get some time for Casey Thompson to get in there and get a significant amount of snaps at least, or vice versa. You know, even if it ends up being Casey, you want to see a lot of Hudson Card in this game. So that's what I hope to see with Rice, and yeah, it's a really good third preseason game to come back and play a team like that. No matter what happens in the first 2. So Texas Tech is week 4, another early game this year against Texas Tech, when historically it's kind of been a little bit later in the season. Last year, obviously, a back and forth barn burner with Texas Tech, getting a win in overtime. I believe Caden Stearns came up with a pick to end that game. But, you know, that game never should have turned out to be like that. A lot of people looked at last year's schedule and they said, you know, this thing was a few points away from being undefeated. Quadruple overtime against Oklahoma, like we talked about earlier. A 3-point loss against Iowa State. And super close game against TCU that came down to Keontae Ingram fumble at the goal line. But you can also flip that around and say they almost lost to Texas Tech. They almost lost to Oklahoma State. You know, so you can look at it a lot of different ways. Yeah, a lot of games came down to the wire. Texas Tech is always going to be, you know, one of those teams that's just good enough to beat you. With the type of offense they run, I think what really killed the Texas defense last year was guys just being out of place, especially in the middle of the field. I think we saw that a ton. Hopefully, with this defensive philosophy coming in, simplifying things a little bit more, just making sure that guys are in place to make the play, not running around chasing receivers all over the field, completely confused of what's going on. Now, with a running back like Bijan and a pounder like Roschon Johnson, I want to see those guys have controlled this game. I want to see just absolute pounding in the running game, and then deep play action passes. That's going to control the clock. That's going to keep the Texas Tech offense off the field, which is what you need against them. So I've got this as a win. I definitely don't see it going into overtimes like last year. But who knows? I mean, Texas Tech, they're, like I said, they're always good enough to beat you. This one is in Austin, which gives me a little bit more comfort. So I got that as a win. Going into October, TCU always shows up against Texas. Max Duggan is back, this year. Killed Texas last year. Killed them on quarterback draws. Killed them. It's just ridiculous. Fairly low-scoring game last year. This game was absolutely wrapped up in the W column for Texas. Keontae Ingram takes a pass and brings it down deep into TCU territory late in the game. And then he gets a handoff on a first down and fumbles the ball and recovered by TCU. He tries to basically do a quick stretch for a touchdown, which did not need to happen. It's first down. You actually want to run a little time off the clock. It's not like the game is on the line. It's not like the championship is on the line. So, just one of his really, really big mistakes at really, really bad times. But this one goes into TCU, which Texas has won before. They've just been the team that always shows up against Texas. Gary Patterson always has these guys ready to play Texas. But I think it's flipped back around this time, and Texas is ready. I see the Texas offense kind of overcoming the TCU defense this year. I really see Bijan Robinson stepping up and sort of taking control of this game. So I've got this at 5-0. And again, I'm picking what I think should happen. I absolutely could see Texas losing this game. We've seen it too many times before. But we've also, we've also seen them win close games against them. We saw Colin Johnson have a big game against TCU a couple years ago. So, again, looking at these first 5 games, this is what I think should happen, which is really important here. All right, so if this thing rolls into Dallas at 5-0, and I haven't looked at who the Land Thieves have before this October 9th game, but that's gonna be huge. Even if Texas does end up dropping to TCU or even Louisiana and rolling in here 4-1, still a pretty big matchup. And again, Oklahoma's picked by most polls starting in the top 3, top 4 at worst. Now, last year was absolutely the year to beat this team. Spencer Rattler was benched in that game. Sam Mellinger stepped up and really had a big game at the end. I just think it came down to trading blows with them. Again, a Texas Longhorns team that lets the other team dictate the pace of the game, no matter if it's a team that has no business staying in the game or if it's a legit good team. We saw it against Oklahoma. We saw it against Iowa State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech. All of these super close games. So Oklahoma's absolutely I think they'll be significantly better than they were last year. Rattler's going to be better. Mims is going to be better. Their backfield gets better. Kennedy Brooks is back. So they're a lot more dangerous, I think, than they were even last year. Whereas Texas, I think, is taking a step back in terms of new coaching staff, new quarterback, whole new offensive scheme, whole new defensive scheme. Now, hopefully, after 5 games, they've kind of got a rhythm going. So this one, though, I've got Oklahoma winning this one. Texas drops to 5-1. against the Land Thieves in Dallas. I just think Oklahoma just has the talent overpowering this one, but it's Texas OU. You never know. I mean, how many times have we seen the lower-ranked team win this game? If Texas does win this game, they're going to have to absolutely go to the wire, even if they're up by 2 touchdowns into the fourth quarter. That's not going to matter. I just see Oklahoma having more firepower, and by this time coming up with some ways to slow down a Bijan Robinson, a Roschon Johnson running game. And, with Sark talking about running an offense that's based on establishing the run with Bijan and then using some play action passes, that if you shut down the run and you make that type of offense one-dimensional, it's easy to guess what's going to happen. So that's kind of how I see that playing out a bit. All right, October 16th, the 7th weekend in a row with no bye. The Pokies come to Austin. Again, great game last year. I think Oklahoma State was ranked like number 6 at that point. Texas beat them in overtime. That was the game with Joseph Osai's walk-off sack against Spencer Sanders. Now, Oklahoma State, I think, is another team that's taken a step or two back, especially in the offense. Chuba Hubbard's gone. Talon Wallace is gone. Spencer Sanders is back, but he doesn't impress me. He'll make some great plays, no doubt about it. He will make some plays that just are just wow plays. But then he'll just go off on the next 2 series and be totally inconsistent with the passing game. So, given Oklahoma State losing Wallace, losing Hubbard, to me puts even more pressure on Spencer Sanders, which he's not that good under pressure, especially in critical situations in a game. He's a good quarterback. I mean, he can run, he can pass, he can throw on the run, all that type of stuff, but just seems like he makes too many bad mistakes, and I do think the Texas defense is going to step up this year. Like I said, I think we're going to get a lot more pressure from the front down linemen, not needing a lot of help from a blitzing linebacker or a blitzing defensive back. There's age and experience among the defensive backs. There's, Overshone is leading in linebacker. And like I mentioned, the transfers before, so there's a lot of age and experience and snaps under the belts of that defense. So I just don't see this Oklahoma State offense putting up anywhere near as much firepower as they did last year. So I've got this one as a win at 6-1. Now after this one, you got a bye, you got a little bit of a break, so you're staying in Austin. That weekend, getting some injuries nursed up, and then to finish October, driving up the street to Waco with Baylor. Halloween Eve, so we don't have a Halloween game this year, but Baylor's one of those teams that you want to put them away early. There's not a lot to say, I think, in terms of interesting matchups of this game. This is just one of those games that you hope that after your bye, you head up there and you kind of take care of business. I've got this one as a win at 7-1. I definitely think what we don't want to see is by this time of the season, a bunch of injuries and a bunch of guys who are just kind of thrown into a starting role. But I think it's a pretty good buffer game before Iowa State, for sure. Oklahoma and Iowa State are definitely the 2 toughest games on paper in this conference, and they're just 1 month removed from each other. So having a Baylor game in there, I think is a decent buffer. And also the ability to just stay in Texas and stay in Central Texas for 3 weeks. Now, going to Iowa State, unlike a team like Oklahoma State that lost some significant offensive contributors, Iowa State's returning theirs. Breece Hall is an absolute legit Heisman candidate, led the entire nation in rushing last year. He's back. He brings back a ton of confidence. I thought Texas did a great job shutting down the Iowa State rushing game last year. And again, this was a 3-point game last year. Talon Wallace, not Talon Wallace, Brock Purdy wasn't as impressive as I thought he would be last year against Texas. But, he's got that experience. Breece Hall has the experience. There's a lot of expectation for Iowa State. And with Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC, a legit good team like Iowa State is going to want to prove that they're better. They're going to want to prove that hey, what about us? we're actually one of the top 2 teams in the conference. So this is a big game for Texas. Like the Arkansas game is a big game, just to kind of an SEC preview, a little SEC precursor. This is sort of the opposite, where if you're exiting the Big 12, you kind of want to try to prove that you're one of the top 2 teams in the conference. But with this game, especially going to Ames, I just think that Iowa State has a little too much offensive firepower for Texas to hang with. I don't think Iowa State gets into the mid to upper 30s in points, but I do see them just providing too much to keep up with, right? More so that their offense is going to be too much for the Texas offense to keep up with. And Mike Rose, their big time linebacker, is back as well. He's a preseason all conference guy. So they've got players all over the field. I think when we counted, Iowa State had like 8 preseason offensive or preseason Big 12 players. So that's how I see that one going down. Now, the last 3 games are, again, on paper, what should kind of be your easier games to finish out the conference. Kansas, obviously, there's been a couple of fluke years, I think, where Kansas really, really stepped up and played Texas hard. Even in 2018, when Texas went to the Big 12 championship game and beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, Kansas still hung with Texas. I believe that was a 7-point win for Texas. So Kansas goes into Austin this time. But yeah, this is one of those games that no matter what happens against Oklahoma, Iowa State, this is where you can really finish your conference schedule strong, starting with this game. So I've got this one as a win, putting Texas at 8-2. Again, this is what I think should happen. Okay, this isn't necessarily what I think absolutely will happen. Okay, I like to kind of start with what I think this team should do in terms of expectations. So I got this as a win. Not much else to say about it. I also would maybe kind of start thinking that at this point in the season, you kind of tone down on Bijan Robinson's workload. I know Coach Sark said that he would like to get Bijan in an ideal situation roughly 20 to 25 touches a game. Now, I could absolutely see that really revving up at the TCU game and then going all the way through to the Iowa State game. But, maybe at this point you kind of start to look for, hopefully you figured out a little bit more of what you can do on offense and toning that down a bit. West Virginia, always tough to travel to West Virginia. Going there is weird, man. I don't know. This game makes me a little nervous. I know Texas did a great job last year of putting this game away, especially on defense. This is really last year's West Virginia game is really where I thought the Texas defense really started to look like legit, knew what they were doing. Overshone had a big game. Bijan Robinson had that ridiculous PlayStation-like run with the juke and the spin and the stiff arm and the other stiff arm. So that gives me a lot of confidence. Last year's win gives me a lot of confidence of what we might see this year. But it does worry me going there. That worries me a bit. I still have this as a win at 9-2. And again, if you're heading into the week of Thanksgiving with 9 wins at this point, you're doing pretty dang good. And again, this is what I think should happen. All right, last game of the season against Kansas State. Always a well-coached team. Always I look at Kansas State a lot like I do Texas Tech. They're always just good enough to beat anybody, but at the end of the season, their record isn't really that great. Texas obviously handled Kansas State last year. Bijan Robinson just absolutely ripped through Kansas State like crazy insane. Had some ridiculous runs where he just would not go down. Tough running, balance, and that was kind of a precursor to the Colorado game, the Alamo Bowl, where he just continued that type of tough, almost impossible to bring down running style. Went blank on a quarterback, Skylar Thompson. Skylar Thompson's back, so he brings back some more experience. Kansas State also always just seems to have a receiver that kills Texas. That they seem to find somebody that's just an absolute killer against the Texas defense, and they kind of keep going back to that well, and Texas has no answer for it. So that's one thing that always concerns me about Kansas State. But like I said, they're always ready to play. They never back down. They're never scared. They come into Austin, this time, which that's going to be a senior day, and you've got a lot of seniors on this team, especially on defense. So that's going to be an interesting way to end the season, I think. With a team that's always well coached and always ready to play on just kind of that holiday week ending the season. And if it does play out like this, maybe Iowa State has 2 losses at this point, or even if it does play out like this and Oklahoma beats Texas, Iowa State beats Texas, that still doesn't mean that there's not going to be a chance for Texas to get into the Big 12 championship game as long as they finish out with a win over Kansas State. So I've got that as a win at 10-2, looking at what should happen. So I know 10-2, I totally understand that a 10-win season for this team seems pretty crazy, and I would completely agree with you. Looking back at the schedule, where I think there could be a third loss is most likely TCU or Oklahoma State. And again, that's within that sort of tough 5-game stretch there in the middle of the season. Texas Tech's always good enough. Louisiana could be a loss. I mean, I'm if you had to pick 4, one of those teams. What I think will happen is 3 losses. I think this thing is at 9-3 at the end of the season. 8-4 is going to be disappointing. 9-3 is going to be okay, not bad, for this team. 10-2 is going to be good. 11-1 is going to be fantastic. So my kind of baseline is 9-3. But just in terms of looking at the schedule now, what I think should happen is 10-2. What I think will happen is 9-3. So that's what I got, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. Let me know what game worries you the most. Which game are you most excited about? what's your prediction in terms of what you think should happen versus what you think will happen? Who do you think will be the starting quarterback for the rest of the year? Right now, it's looking like Hudson Card's going to be the starter. If that does happen and he's still the starter deep into October, will Casey Thompson transfer? Maybe. I think that Casey Thompson transfer is a whole lot more likely than a Hudson Card transfer. But anyway, let me know what you think about that, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Check out our position-by-position previews on the channel if you haven't already. And always check us out at TexasHornsFans.com. Don't forget to give it a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We'll see you on the next video.